And so the first reign of Edward IV, 1461 to 1470. Now, why not just kill Henry VI? Well, it's because Henry VI is clearly incapable, and if he did, his claim would simply go to his son, Edward. Now, Warwick was convinced that what Edward of York, Edward IV, really needed was a French marriage. But the young Edward IV fell madly in love with a woman called Elizabeth Woodville, a widow of a Lancastrian knight. Now, Warwick was absolutely furious. He was like, come on, man, marry into the French royal family, unite the royal families, get French support, and make sure the French won't support our opponents. And the two after this fall out. Edward IV wouldn't let Warwick decide who he married. Taxes were rising, there was disorder in England, and private armies in the shires. Encouraged by France, Warwick and Margaret then became allies. After fighting each other and being enemies for so long, Warwick and Margaret come to terms. Warwick's daughter married Margaret's son, Edward of Windsor, Edward of the House of Lancaster, the ones the Lancastrians wanted to be the next king. Warwick is out for himself. Now, in 1470, Warwick's forces invade to fight Edward of York, his former ally. Edward IV at this time was in the north, and Warwick rapidly seized control of London. The news catches Edward IV by surprise, and with Warwick and Margaret's support, Henry VI is crowned King of England again. Edward IV is forced to order his remaining army to scatter and flee England. They've been completely outmanoeuvred. Warwick and Margaret have seized control of England, and Edward IV is in no position to oppose them. And so Edward IV goes into exile and tells his army to escape and join him in exile. And we have the second reign of Henry VI from 1470 to 1471. So you can tell it's not going to last long. In alliance with France, England declares war on Burgundy. And so this is a real strange moment, really, for the 100 Years' War. Previously, England and Burgundy had been fighting France. Now, occasionally, by the way, France and Burgundy have been fighting England, but now England and France announce that they are allies against Burgundy. And the French and England of Henry VI are going to fight side by side. Burgundy, out of desperation, decide that they're going to lend troops to Edward IV, because now England has become nothing more than a pawn in the wars of Europe. And if England declares war on you, what you should really do was trying to, therefore, replace who will be the King of England. Burgundy, facing a united England and France, decide to lend troops to Edward IV to try and get England to change sides. And in 1471, Edward IV lands at Ravenspur and captures London. There is then the Battle of Barnet. Edward IV fights against Warwick. In the thick fog, the army of Warwick starts to fight itself. It's convinced that it's been ambushed by Edward IV and the armies of Warwick start to lash out in all directions. Unbeknownst to them, they have actually just started attacking themselves. Warwick's army then realises that they've been attacked by their own side. They're convinced that they've been betrayed, and they start to run. Warwick is killed in the confusion. Margaret and her son Edward land from France to try and stop Edward IV, but Gloucester refuses to let them enter and shuts its gates to them. Now Margaret, with her army, starts to roam the countryside, and Edward IV races now, having beaten Warwick, races to try and deal with Margaret, and then is fought the Battle of Tewkesbury. Margaret's army is destroyed at Tewkesbury. Her son, Edward of Westminster, is killed. Now, with no heirs left alive, Henry VI is then quietly murdered, because he has now got no one to hand his claim on to. And so Edward IV is crowned again, and it seems as if the War of the Roses is over. Warwick is dead. Margaret's army destroyed. Henry VI dead. Henry VI's son dead. And Edward IV is in control of the country. And we have from 1471 to 1483 the second reign of Edward IV. Order was restored. Except for the Tudors, the Lancastrian line was destroyed. And let's face it, the Tudors have a very tenuous claim. Their claim depends on the fact that they had indeed married the Queen Mother, and there is no record of that. I do bear in mind that we don't even know that those children are Tudors. Remember, they could indeed be Beauforts. As it happens, Edward IV had gained then a favourable peace treaty with France and retook Berwick-on-Tweed from Scotland that had been lost by Margaret in return for an army. Margaret had sold Berwick-on-Tweed to Scotland in return for a Scottish army to take part in the War of the Roses. Edward IV, as well as getting a favourable peace with France, retakes Berwick-on-Tweed from the Scots. And so he then starts to rule England, it has to be said, rather well. He's an open, affable man. He's a generally merciful man for the time. Had he lived for maybe another 4 years, his son would then have been old enough to succeed unchallenged to the throne. He started to try and restore law and order. His personal motto was method and order. He had been unbeaten in battle. He was a fine general and a warlord, as well as a good organiser and manager. He appeared to have all the skills needed to be a very successful medieval king. He reformed England's administration and started to remove corruption from the government system. He added the Duchy of Lancaster to the Crown's estates, making the English monarchy considerably wealthier. He reformed the government finances. He allowed the prosperity of the nation to recover, although he failed to deal with the problem of overmighty subjects. Some families in England still had far too much power when he died. And in 1483 died he did. On the 9th of April 1483, his son, the 12-year-old Edward V, came to the throne, with his uncle, Richard, as Lord Protector. Now there were some question marks, however, over the legitimacy of the children of Edward IV, which of course includes the new king, Edward V. There were rumours that Edward IV had married a woman called Eleanor Butler before he'd married Elizabeth Woodville, which would have made those two princes to be illegitimate. There were also stories that Edward IV might not have been the father of these princes. And it has to be said that it was certainly possible. In fact, both of these rumours are possible. Eleanor Butler was one of 3 young widows who got on very well with Edward IV. Eleanor Butler, Elizabeth Woodville, and Elizabeth Lucy. There are rumours that it's hard to prove either way that Edward IV might in fact have married all 3 of them without telling them, which would have meant the Princess in the Tower would indeed have been illegitimate, and it has to be said Elizabeth Woodville might well have been playing away in France. And so there were real grounds to guess that the 2 princes might not have been legitimate, and that if they weren't, that would have meant that the true King of England would indeed have been Richard III of England. And he certainly believed himself, or at least he seems to have believed, that he was the rightful King of England. And the citizens of London asked Richard to be king. And so in 1483, you have the 12-year-old Edward V crowned, but with real doubts over his legitimacy. And Richard III will take control of England.